Welcome to Inherently Distinctive.
Welcome back to Inherently Distinctive with Mark Goodman. Mark is a Nevada-based intellectual property attorney who helps entrepreneurs, founders, and creators protect the unique elements of their businesses through smart, strategic IP planning. I'm Heidi Mack, and today we're talking about whether or not you should trademark your name, your logo, or both. Mark's going to break down the differences, what each one protects, and how to prioritize your filings based on what matters most to your brand. This episode is Should You Trademark Your Business Name, Logo, or Both? Welcome back, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, as always, fun to be online with you.
Thank you. Let's get to it. So, what is that difference? What is the difference between trademarking a business name and trademarking a logo?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny because people do confuse this a little bit sometimes, but we'll think it's like, what's the difference between gloves and shoes, right? I mean, they're covering totally different things, right? So when you're trademarking the name, I mean, think about this, right? If Nike has the name Nike. They have the swoosh trademark logo, right? And they have the phrase "just do it," and they probably have, I think, 168 other trademarks if you look it up on all kinds of permutations of different things that they use. Some of which are live, some of which are dead, right? Well, if somebody's using the name Nike on some kind of shoes or some name that's similar to that or that name on some other product, they're going to go after them. You always think about it. If you had to go after someone in court, what would you be able to do? So you would go after them on your name trademark, right? We own this name in this field and you're infringing, right? And conversely, let's say a competitor has a totally different name, but they're using the swoosh on their, oh, whoa. Well, then they're going after them on the swoosh trademark. The name would not be relevant whatsoever, right? So, yeah, they just cover totally different things. Now, there are some interesting topics with this, right? So one thing I see sometimes is a lot of logos have the name in them. Okay. So interesting, right? Now, and so then I get this question all the time. Well, could I just put them together, right? So, and I have to say, you could do that. It's just not as powerful of a position, right? That you're going to be getting because now the more different things that are together, the less overall power you have, right? So you don't have as much power. Or if you have a stylized version of a name, which actually I like getting, but it's not as high a priority as getting the text only version of that trade name because the text only is just I want to own this name. I don't care how it's stylized. I don't care what colors are used. I don't care what design is used. It's a name. It's text, right? And then I'd also want to have like the logo design, regardless of what text is in there, right? Or isn't in there necessarily, right? And sometimes there'll be a text element in there. Fine, that'll be in there too, depending on what you're using, right? But um, it's you're just not in as good of a position if that's all you have, and you have to think of yourself in the position of a infringer slash defendant, right? Trying to get out of this, right? Well, I could if the names are very similar, and you have a trademark registration on the name, I'm in a tough position to wiggle out from this, right? But if let's say you've got this stylized version of the name in a logo form, and I'm kind of ripping off your name in that I'm doing something somewhat similar name such that it's an argument, right? If I'm flat out infringing, I'm going to be in trouble anyway, either way, well, regardless of what type of filing you did. But these borderline cases, right? Now, as a defendant, I can say, well, Your Honor, yeah, the names are kind of similar, but their trademark is not to the name; it's only to this version in this design, which I have a totally different design in my branding. So consumers aren't going to be confused; they're going to be just fine, and I should be able to continue on. So yeah, you're just in a less powerful position if you don't do both. Now, most of the time, I prioritize the name. I feel like that for most businesses, most of the time is your top priority, right? Because your question is, should you get the name or logo or both? you want to get as much as you can, but I understand depending on your business's situation, sometimes you got to prioritize resources, right? So almost always the name's a priority. Um, then typically a logo and or maybe like a catchphrase, right?
Mhm.
I'm loving it, right? Something like, if it's important, right? And the prioritization, I think, is going to be based on just how important is this to your brand, right? Um, and by that I mean whatever consumers or customers you have in your industry, what are they going to identify with, right? I mean, we're all brand consumers to some extent, right? If you walk down the street and you see the Starbucks symbol, right, you immediately have a set of beliefs and understandings about what you would be getting if you did business with that entity, right? And even if you maybe don't have as famous of a brand like Starbucks, your customer base should have that same feeling. When they see your name, your logo, they should immediately be like, oh, that is X, X, Y, Z, and B, in terms of what I'm getting. And it can be different things, right? I mean, I often tell people this, like, I mean, the guys that run the fancy restaurant called the French Laundry in Napa that has like $1,000 plate meals probably make a lot of money. The people who run In-N-Out Burger make a lot of money. Like you can, but they're different niches. They're different branding, and that's fine, right? You just have to understand what that branding is for you, and um, and lock it down and stay consistent with it. I think.
So yeah, it does sound like you're saying it's stronger, like to do them separately.
Right.
Like the name and yeah, and the logo separately. You want to get the most, and you're saying if you can't, the name is the most important. Is there a situation where you recommend filing the logo first instead of
Yeah.
the
So if you really think that the logo for your business is maybe more important than the name, right? Now the one I business that comes to mind is maybe in sort of clothing and apparel.
name?
Arguably, depending on this, because if people just see, a lot of times you just get used to just seeing a symbol like the swoosh or like, you know, uh, the Gucci symbol, something like that, right? And just immediately identifying it can be at least just as important as a name in those circumstances. And I just think that usually, especially, it's harder to change a name. Like if you ended up having issues with it down the road, rebranding with another logo, while it could be costly depending on the circumstance, at least it's not. It doesn't strike me as nearly as painful as changing the name of your business or your product would be. So yeah, and the question you have, does either one have a stronger, broader protection? Not really. It's always, but they're just covering different things. The way I look at it.
So then, how does the design of the logo affect the strengths or limits of the trademark protection as we were talking about logos here?
Well, I'd say um, there's a couple things to be thinking about. I mean, the logos can come in all kinds of different designs, and there's a whole industry of the graphic designer folks that are out there coming up with different things with it. I suppose there's a little bit of a push and pull on if you have a really simple design of something, maybe that's more powerful because it's like here, it's just like a lightning bolt, or it's like just looks like a tree, basically. However you design it, right? That maybe has more power, but then that may be a little more likely to read on somebody else's application or registration to where you might be rejected on it. So I think really you just want to come up with what you think is great branding for your business and lock it down, right? I don't think it. I haven't noticed. Maybe one I could come back to. I haven't noticed a real difference on the type of the design elements. Now, one factor that does come up that's relevant to that question is color, right? So when you file a trademark application, you actually have to select: am I selecting color as a feature of this mark or not?
Interesting.
Okay, so here's the trade-off, right? If you select no color first of all, just practicalities. You've got to figure out how to get a black and white image uploaded to them, which sometimes is a technical thing we have to work with, right? But we're good at that. Um, and so then you're not claiming any kind of color scheme at all, right? Or if you do claim color, then you have to describe what colors are being used and where they're using, how they're fitting in, and so forth. And you have to submit a color image of your logo, right? So now, and again, it's one of these scenarios similar to what we talked about before with the prioritization, is that if your company's really growing, I'd actually recommend getting both. We can get a color and the no color claim application. For small businesses starting out, I tend to not upsell it that hard to get both, right? And usually the priority there is the one without color as a feature, because it's generally a bit broader, right? Because it doesn't matter what colors are being used, it's just this design. Um, However, there are scenarios where maybe the color one is better, right? Again, we're always thinking about, yes, if somebody's trying to pull a fast one on you and infringe on your trademark, what could they say, right? And what could you say about them, right? So I often look at this as, imagine two plots of land, right? Because intellectual property in some ways is analogous to like a plot of land, except it's this imaginary land that we
Yeah.
own, right? In space somehow, right? And so imagine two plots of land that are mostly overlapping each other, but they're not completely overlapping. They overlap. There are certain areas that one of them covers and the other doesn't, and vice versa, right? And that's how I feel about this color versus the black and white logo, because it if let's say the company you're going after, right, has changed um, your logo design a bit, arguably enough to maybe get around it, but let's say their color scheme is just dead on exactly what you use, right?
Yeah.
You'd have a much better chance with the color mark than with the black and white. And then conversely, let's say they use a totally different color scheme, but their logo design is strikingly similar to yours, right? Well, then you're in a better position with the um, the non-color application in that case. Um, Having said all of this, don't stress too much about this color and non-color thing, right? Most of the time, that is not going to make or break your company.
Okay.
Um, Again, my general print, my default is to go with the non-color as your first priority. But if you're really locked in on a certain color scheme that you really think is popping, then maybe we can go with color first. Um, I just think of some famous companies out there, right? How color comes in. Like, just think of that sort of brown of UPS, right? They even had a whole marketing, like, what can brown do for you, right? So they're really committing to brown, right? And so they would definitely want to lock down their brown color UPS logo, right? In
Mhm.
addition to probably their other one, right? So that's an example there. Or just like, that green and white with Starbucks that you always see, right? Arguably is, maybe that's more important than the design of that kind of statue logo woman thing that they have, right? With because the green, that you just
True.
think Starbucks, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. I think
No,
that's a good one. But
you
yeah,
brought up
it's
a lot of
it's a
things.
good conversation to have. Like I said, this is not one where I think it's going to like sink the ship either way, whether you file a color or not. But good conversation to have.
Yeah, no, I never even thought about like I know about a little bit of trademarking, like you should do it, but that color scheme thing, I was like, wow, that is something to really think about. Um, but like you said, don't freak out at the same time.
Yeah, not on this one.
Um,
Other things, yes. Like with there, I am not afraid to sound alarm bells on this podcast,
okay.
as you know, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
this is fatal if you screw this up. This
Okay.
just isn't one of them. So.
Okay. Well, I mean, you talked a little bit like you were saying, like what can Brown do for you? Let's move on to like because you were talking about catchphrases too. Like, let's move on to like slogans. Where do they fit in the picture? When should a business consider filing for those?
So I usually, so there's it could be priority two after the name sometimes, right? Because if you have a really strong catchphrase that you're really pushing, sometimes that's even more important than a logo arguably. Although usually most of the time, because you keep the logo typically forever, a very long time, we usually go name number one, logo number two, then we get into some catchphrases. And it just depends on, are you going to really use this a lot? Is this going to really be part of the branding? One thing about catchphrases, they're much easier to pivot off of, right? Because it's just a marketing catchphrase. It's not going to it be nearly as damaging to your business if you did have to change it. But it also can be really, um, sometimes it can be just as identifying to consumers as the name almost, right? Depending on your industry, depending on the type of marketing that's out there. So, I mean, I just mentioned some of these catchphrases that are pretty famous, and everybody listening to this podcast, watching it, is gonna know exactly which companies I'm referring to. So that's the power of trademark, right? Is that you if you build a trustworthy brand and you lock it down, you're going to get that instantaneous business, right? Without having to sell your consumer on your business over and over again, right? It's a shortcut in that way.
Well, then say like, okay, those big companies, they're, doing great with their logos, their names, their brands. Say you have a company that, you're helping, um, maybe it's not working and they want to rebrand. So how soon should they start filing that trademark like right away? How does that work?
So your question there is, if you were to um, rebrand with
Yeah.
a new catchphrase, right? Should you do a trademark right away? Um,
A logo, any of
I mean, I think it's just like starting a new company in some ways, right? Like ideally, it's better to get on file earlier, right? You're in a better position in terms of priority. Um, sometimes I contrast this with patent, though. Like in patent, if you don't file by certain times, you can lose your rights. You don't lose your right to do so in trademark, so there's less pressure to file early there. But you could end up behind somebody or get rejected, be in that position where if you'd have filed earlier, you wouldn't be. So there's that, right?
Mhm.
So again, depending on the resources involved, you just have to make a business decision. But you know, I'm always gonna be like, yeah, let's if we're gonna rely on this for branding and it's going to be important to your brand, then let's get it. And again, trademark I consider to be a good deal because, like think I said in the last podcast, something like this, relative to most legal problems that you would have compared to a lawsuit or some big business transaction, a trademark search application, all that stuff is a drop in the bucket compared to those things, right? And it isn't even that bad compared to most startup costs that businesses have. So when you think about that, and the other thing with trademark, it they can last forever, right? Think of every old brand. Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company has been around since before the Civil War, right? They still have a trademark, right? As long as you can keep renewing it, keep showing periodically to the office that you're in business with this name, you keep it and it gets stronger over time. The longer it's been in business, the stronger it is. So as a long-term investment, I think it's a great deal. Um, but again, that's a business decision depending on where you are and how important that catchphrase is.
What can happen if you file the wrong type of application? Like, what problems do you have to refile? Do you lose certain rights?
So when you say the wrong type of application, are we talking about, well, I filed on a logo and not a name? Or
Yeah,
here's some things I see out there, right?
Mhm.
In the world, right? I do see sometimes people do what I mentioned before, which is they file for, they'll have like a stylized version of it. Like, okay, the name Goodman, but it's in a certain type of script with a certain either maybe color or style to it, right? And they'll apply for that, but they won't actually apply for the name itself, right? Which to me is the bigger priority usually. And so they just kind of don't, because they don't really understand how the process works, and then they just file that, right? So I do see that out there, and in that case, it's okay to have the stylized one, but then you're just going in the reverse order of what I normally prioritize for you, right? I'd say, okay, let's get the name first if we have to. So then you'd want to go ahead and file for the name. whenever you figure this out, right? As far as the other wrong types, this color non-color thing, like I said, not the end of the world, but it is something to be thinking about, and they always ask you that uh, uh, on your application. One thing, if people are filing applications on their own, you can get goobered up here a little bit, because let's say you'll have situations where you'll claim color as a feature, but then, or you won't claim color, but you'll submit a color image, and then they'll reject it, and we need a new image, right? These are not going to sink the ship, but it's a hassle, right? And you're trying to run a business here, and you don't want to keep getting stressed. People get stressed out because they oh my god, my trademark's gone, and it's like, oh yeah, this is easily fixable, but it's still another cause of stress that you don't need. So.
Yeah. Well, then, Mark, do you have any last advice for somebody, building up this brand identity, what they should do to come see you?
So, again, I think it just comes down to that prioritization. Let's start with the most important things to our brand. Think of our overall branding strategy. What is really most important? And when we're thinking about what's important, factors are, how devastating would it be if I had to change this in the future, right? If I had to rebrand, pivot, whatever you want to say, right? How devastating would it be if someone else was using something similar in a similar industry, and how painful would the consumer confusion be, right? If that happened, right? And just how front and center is this going to be to my customer base, right? And consider those three things, and then the things that are really important to those values, let's lock them down early. And then for other stuff, as the company builds, let's get more, right? Like I've said, when you put a famous company in, like, Starbucks or Nike or whatever have you, you don't usually get just like, okay, they got 3 or 4 trademarks. You get, over 100, some of which are live and some of which maybe are abandoned because they don't use them anymore, something like that. But you get a huge, like, in the business, we call this a Chinese wall. I don't know who came up with that phrase, like wall of China, whatever, right? But we call it a Chinese wall around your brand, which is, the idea is you have this, you can't completely block your brand, but if you get this trademark and this trademark and this trademark and this one, and you, pretty soon it's like a wall, right? And nobody can get in. So that's what you want to be doing. And it builds over time if you're a newer business, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you so much, Mark. You have wonderful information for everybody out there. And thanks for tuning in to Inherently Distinctive. Whether it's your name, your logo, or your slogan, trademark protection is one of the smartest investments you can make in your business's future. If you're unsure what to file or how to start building your brand's legal foundation, visit goodmanlawnevada.com to connect with Mark. And don't forget, if you like this episode, go ahead and leave a review, and I'm going to leave it to Mark. What you going to say?
Yeah,
Or
lock it
smash that
down.
better smash that subscribe button. I
Yeah,
thought you
smash
were
that subscribe
listening.
button. Yeah, I was thinking about the trademark stuff. Yeah, but yeah, we do. Yeah, also smash the subscribe button. Sorry.
That's right.
No.
So you never miss an episode. Thank you again for joining for us, Mark. Thank you so much.
Okay. Awesome.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.